Great to have you with us, and let me briefly introduce you. So, Johannes, you are at the Research Center for AI and Robot Law at the University of Würzburg, and yeah, you're a bit from the field of criminal science, actually. And in July 2023, you passed the first state examination of law. Very good, but also work very closely now with Professor Erik Hilgendorf. And you're an expert on regulation of AI and the criminal law assessment of generative AI systems. And what's super interesting about Johannes, which is why I'm very glad that he's here with us today, is that he published a Handkommentar, so a very German format, but very international topic on the EU AI Act. And this thing has several hundreds of pages and is super detailed. So he is an expert on this AI regulation in the Nomos Verlag. And he heads also super fitting for our topic today, the Legal Tech Center at the University of Würzburg's Faculty of Law. So the Research Center for AI and Robot Law. Welcome, Johannes.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah. And let's continue with Dr. Philip Fox. We have you here with us as a policy specialist from the Kira Center in Berlin. What's important to know about you is that you work on AI and its really political implications and global ramifications. So the Kira Center in Berlin is an independent AI policy think tank, and you are the co-author of the International AI Safety Report. And this has been written not with nobodies, but with the likes of Joshua Bengio and your Kira Center colleagues like Daniel Privitera, who, by the way, is also super active as you are in the JTC 21 Committee of Sen 7 So it all somehow comes together, the topic of AI risk, AI regulation, and AI safety. And you have... That's all I wanted to say about you. But we can
thank you.
We can definitely get deeper into your background as well. But let me introduce, last but not least, Chris. Here with us, Chris Schmitz, a PhD candidate at the Hertie School of Governance. Now I think it's only called Hertie School. Actually, I studied there as well. It's a super interesting institution, but so is Chris's second endeavor, which is really fitting to what Pamela told us this morning in the keynote, because you are also an incoming Winter Fellow with GovAI, so an expert not just on AI regulation and working with the likes of Professor Joanna Bryson and Professor Gerhard Hammerschmidt at the Hertie School, but also regarding the GovTech topic. Welcome, Philip and Chris as well.
Thanks for having me.
And to make things which are already rather complicated today, right? Today is our deep dive day, a bit more simple. Our topic today is trust through transparency, from AI rules to compliance. So as Arndt mentioned on the outset, we have evolved this forum from iteration to iteration, from principles to practice, from theory to application, from rules to compliance. So it's always trying to get things more concrete. And to make concrete what we're talking about in the first place is my first question. Let's start with what we are talking about. What is transparency in your definition when it comes to AI systems? And what are some of the most interesting aspects or dimensions that you are currently working on?
Okay, I'm going to make a start. So I think it's helpful to distinguish like 3 layers of transparency. So the first 2 will be familiar to everyone who's followed like the heated debates around the AI Act in the last days of the negotiations. This is the model layer and the application layer. And yeah, as you know, there was this controversy, and I think it was a good decision to say, okay, we need to regulate not just the application, but also the models, because lots of the risks at the application layer are like downstream of what happens at the model layer. I think this is basically sorted. What I now see is a trend towards also looking at the 3rd layer, and that's the organizational layer, where we look not just at the model and the application itself, but also at like the broader organizational protocols and the safety culture within the companies that develop this technology. And why does that matter? Well, one example is internal deployment. So you know that the most capable models are not out there on the market. They are first deployed internally in the organization. And right now there is very little oversight, and it's very hard for regulators to know what's going on there. And to really cover this, I think organizational transparency is one way to go. And the other example is we have these frontier safety frameworks that I think 12 companies by now have published. They're also required by the Code of Practice, which is a good thing. The question is, who knows that the commitments that companies make in these frameworks will actually follow through. So when they say, look, when a model crosses this critical capability threshold, we're not going to deploy it unless safeguards are in place. That's what they say. It's good that they say it, but will they actually do it? And this depends really a lot on like what are the organizational protocols? Who's making this decision when push comes to shove? With what information? Like what is the process? And I think this is going to be the next trend in the transparency debate, is to also look at this organizational layer.
Great, so perfect first distinction that when we're talking about transparency and AI, we're not just thinking about the high-risk AI systems and the transparency requirements according to Article so-and-so, but we also are talking, of course, about the codes of practice that have already been developed by thousands of stakeholders at the EU level, and the AI models, the frontier models that have to have certain transparency obligations. But I'm interested, Chris, because you also worked on this, I think it's called Moral Agency Framework for state AI integration. What kind of spin, what kind of angle do you bring to the transparency debate?
Actually, it's remarkably similar. So that paper makes a case for the conditions under which AI can be legitimately integrated in state structures. But I think it translates really well, and actually it pretty much echoes exactly what Philip just said, except in a more strong tone. We argue in that, or I would argue now, that our conception of transparency of AI, what it does and how it's integrated in structures, can't really rest on any technical understanding of what this model looks like other than its inputs and its outputs. And we motivate this in a lot more detail in the paper, but I'll make it short here. It's for two reasons. The first one is that our institutions can't set the bar. I think we've seen this pretty clearly. We are unable legally, structurally, to say what is a level of explainability, and not just explainability, but for example, freedom from bias or detectability or whatever, that makes a model or an AI system worthy of treatment that is qualitatively different from a complete black box or a super biased model or whatever. And I would argue, or we argue in this paper, that there is only one bar that our institutions could set for this, which is that the system is so constrained that it becomes fully deterministic, which, as we all know, would make it pointless, because the whole point is that AI can act in stochastic spaces, right? Spaces of uncertainty. So that's the first sort of institutional and I guess theoretical angle, but there's a much more practical one for me, which is that, let's be real, we are slow at legislating. And I think, like, even were it possible to set a standard that everyone agreed this is an acceptable standard of transparency for a certain type of model, I don't believe that this is a future-proof model, because it just needs updating so frequently and so on. So I think there's just a very practical sort of limit on how feasible transparency standards on the technical level are. Yeah, but to finish up, I think we need to build structures and we need to write laws that assume we can't look into these models, basically.
Luckily, we have a legal specialist with us, just talking about future-proofing these laws. I mean, everybody's for transparency, right? More of it is always better, and sunshine destroys dirtiness and secrets and so on. So transparency is great. Everybody's all for it. But we need to have some requirements to actually make it tangible and also obligatory in terms of compliance. And so I'm wondering, Johannes, do you think the AI Act does a good job in covering like what should be the minimum requirements for transparency for especially high-risk AI systems, and maybe also with a view to what Philip is working on, the frontier models?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to transparency and the AI Act, it's like, as we heard before today, that's not only security, but there's security and safety. Yeah, there's a distinction. And when it comes to transparency, you can look at it and you can divide it in three, mainly in three parts. The first part is transparency towards whom? Towards the authorities and towards the enforcement. So there is, for example, Article 11 and Article 12 on the AI Act that gives the duty to make some documentation and to install some logging services, so you create evidence, as we heard today before, when the authorities and when the notified bodies come into action and want to test these models or test these AI systems. That's the first part. The second part of transparency is towards the deployers and towards the users that get in action with the AI systems and with the AI models. So if you use the system, you have to know, okay, which use cases are they made for, because if you use an AI system not the way it's meant to be, it is clear that this way is not safe. And the third part is transparency towards third parties, for especially citizens and social media users, when it comes to generated media. If there is scientific media that was generated by an AI system, it should be clear that this is not the real world, this is not real impact, but it is created by someone, especially at AI systems. And so I think we can divide transparency in these three parts.
Do you mind if I follow up by straight away trying to test my take against what you just said? Do you think any of those three forms of transparency actually require understanding what's going on inside the model, or can you cover any or all of them by just knowing, for example, what went into the model training process, what the specifications for post-training were, and what the sorts of inputs and outputs when it's deployed look like?
So I think you don't need to know how the system works for part 2 and part 3, especially part 3 when it comes to signing obligations or signing to disclosure obligations. You don't need to know how the system works at all. But if it comes to security and product safety, there's at least a bare minimum that you have to understand how it works and where are the pathways, where is the decision really made. And so this can mean that there is at least a bare minimum of transparency and accountability in the system.
This is going really great. You're doing a great job, guys, because you just answered both questions, which were our next questions. One of them was whether we need to differentiate between transparency, as you said, right, for regulators, for auditors, for end users in a way. And this is a very important distinction, I think. But I'm also interested in Philip's take, because to what extent is it then transparency achieving this desired state more of a technical challenge, or more of a governance challenge at the organization level, or more really of a communication challenge that we already know what to do, but we just need to communicate it to these target groups, to the end users in a, I don't know, model card. It's less about the technical explainability, more about the end user interpretability or understandability of AI systems, dependability. Okay, I'm getting a bit too far, but I'm interested in your take.
Yeah, so Patrick, you mentioned this, everyone is in favor of transparency, but I think there's one exception, and that's the companies who are actually building the stuff. When you talk to, I'm not going to name any companies, but we all know who those companies are, and I mean, they are really afraid of sharing trade secrets, that's one thing, and there are also like understandable reasons. So one like really crucial topic right now is information security. So we want to make sure that especially the most capable frontier models are not stolen or sabotaged by foreign hackers, including state-level hackers. And as a regulator, I want to know, what are the companies doing to prevent that? What I don't necessarily want is for the public to know exactly what measures the companies are taking to prevent this, because the hackers will also read this. So we do absolutely have to make this distinction between the regulator and the public. Other than that, I completely agree with your point, Chris, that these general purpose models, they are almost completely inscrutable. So we don't know how they work internally. We can't predict their behavior. So pre-deployment testing is great. We absolutely need to do it, but we can't rely on this. We have to really investigate how are the models behaving in the wild. And so this is this other, I think, big trend that I see right now, post-deployment monitoring. So I've been involved in a project where we've come up with the idea of safety performance indicators, similar to KPIs, where you just take the model, monitor it in the wild, and check, for example, for refusal rates to harmful requests, and really follow the model as it develops. And I think that's the other kind of transparency, like not just thinking about the pre-deployment stuff and then say, okay, now the model got our stamp, it's safe and you can use it. We really have to also do this continuously after it's been on the market.
That's a great forward-looking point, but let's stay a minute in these regulatory waters we still swim in. So we have the EU AI Act, we have transparency requirements, we have now the digital omnibus, so this digital package of the European Commission, which right now it's still like a suggestion. We still need the trilogue negotiations to nail this down, but the idea is that it's up for grabs, much of it again, as to what will be the final requirements, as well as deadlines for conformity assessment and all this red tail behind the requirements that we're talking about today, where auditing AI systems really has to kick into practice. And maybe we can have a quick round. What is your reaction to the digital omnibus at this stage? Do you think it helps the cause of furthering European regulation of AI, or is it rather opening a Pandora's box of subtly rolling back requirements down the road? Maybe Philip, you can start.
Yeah, so with these long documents published by the EU, you can always talk about the details, but I think the big question is it net positive? For the AI, I would say, yeah, it's net positive that we have this regulation. I also think it's net positive that the omnibus now simplifies it a little bit. I think there are lots of good measures in there, so I think it makes sense to postpone rules without the standards being ready. It makes sense to simplify regulation for smaller companies, including small to mid caps. I also think it's a great idea to centralize general purpose AI oversight in the AI office, because it would just be very hard for like each member state to build the kind of technical expertise that you need to execute on this well. Doesn't mean I like everything that's in there. So for example, this idea that you can self-assess out of the high-risk registration requirement. That, for example, I'm not sure about, because I think in the future, what will be or become a bigger topic is multi-agent risk. So sometimes you don't just want to assure that like an individual model or application is safe. You also want to see like how are the different models or agents interacting, for example, on financial markets. And here I think it's a problem if, as a regulator, you don't have an overview like which models are being used, because not everyone's registering them. Still, on the whole, I think it's net positive, and I don't know if people have other figures, but what I've heard is that the omnibus reduces like the overall compliance burden imposed by the AI Act by around 15%. That's something, but it's also not like hugely cutting red tape. So I think it's not overshooting.
Yeah, I think I agree with virtually everything, but also I'm much less in the weeds of the day-to-day happenings. I wanted to give a more general comment, which is that I have found it a little bit sad how like reactive and unprincipled the entire development of AI regulation has felt in Europe for me, in the sense that it felt like the AI Act was written because the first von der Leyen Commission wanted to get something done on AI before it was over, and then the first big overhaul with GPAI started in response to ChatGPT, and now another overhaul. Let's be real, I think despite having a lot of advantages, it seems to largely be in response to geopolitical pressure. And I think that there are certain ways that the EU could have just gone about it in a more principled way. The other really big problem with the AI Act that I don't think the omnibus solves, because like I said at the start, I think it's not solvable, is that at the start there was this hope that you would say, okay, we will set some sort of transparency requirement, but what exactly it is we will do in standardization. And I think that the omnibus does not solve or does not give us this realization that we need, which is that I just don't think it's possible to set that transparency requirement, and even if it wouldn't be possible to update it regularly enough. And I don't think that aspect of it is solved, basically.
So when it comes to the AI omnibus, I think there are some proposals in there that are necessary, especially the postponement of the high-risk systems back to 2027 for now, because of the harmonized standards. You can't be under the danger of punishment if you don't really know what you have to stick to. I think that was necessary, and I think this will be at the end of this legislation. But there are other things, for example, the adoption of the GDPR. So I think right now there might be some frictions on the GDPR and the AI Act, for example, when it comes to sensitive data on Article 9 of GDPR. So if you want to train some data and data pools or AI models, you have to make sure that the data you're using are have a kind of level, yeah, a certain level. And for this case, you have to use sensitive data. And right now, it is so that that the requirements or the conditions you can use sensitive data on a special kind are higher in the AI Act than they are in the GDPR. In the AI Act, this should be an exemption to GDPR, so that is a little confusing. And I think if they streamline these rules, these regulations, that would be a good thing, and it has to be done. Some other things, like the definition of information, of personal information in the GDPR, yeah, I think this needs to be discussed.
Mm-hmm. Wow, you guys are really already into the details of the omnibus. Very impressive, and I'm not expecting that everybody in the audience has this level already. So allow me a short interlude to just pick up 2 points you mentioned. I also think it's very important what you said, that before there was an obligation to register your idea that your system is not high risk according to Article 6 and so on. So that means does not have to fulfill the requirements in terms of compliance. And now they kind of weakened this to the point that you do have to have a justification, is my understanding, but you do not need to register it. So there's no oversight, if I understand you correctly, and only on demand would you have to prove that, no, for this and this reason, I am exempted. Is that more or less correct? Yeah, and the other one point that I really think we need to go deeper into is the interplay between the horizontal AI Act rules and the sectoral rules we have already, which you alluded to with the GDPR, but of course it's much more than that. It's machine regulation, it's finance, as you said. We have a lot of sectoral rules, and so when something is high risk according to Annex 1, and we don't know if the deadline for conformity will be end of 2027 or maybe later, but I think it will be a maximum of 16 months postponement. So also not a brutal postponement until 2030 something, but we are talking about a maximum of 16 months. And so we all agree here on this panel that in this critical time window, we need to keep the pressure up of developing AI standards and norms. We need to set up the national supervisory regimes, and also here in Germany, in Poland, or wherever that may be in EU member states, to be ready for auditing AI. And of course, we need to do the work at BSI, at Fraunhofer, at your organizations, at the TÜV for sure, to be ready to audit AI systems. That's something we all agree on. But what I hear mostly from companies is really that they have a big pain point when it comes to the legislative interplay. They say that it's just too much, too complex, and it's not really possible to know in the machinery sector or wherever how this works. So back to you, Johannes. Sorry, long introduction, but I think we are getting at a critical point here. What's the right balance between Lex Specialis and the horizontal AI Act? What would you recommend? You're the legal expert here.
You already did the main question. That's the thing that needs to be discussed, and I think the problems come up if you do the same, if you regulate the same thing on different angles. For example, there's one thing like a risk part in regulation from the machinery directive and the AI Act. This is they define the same thing, but they use it in a different way. So if you want to comply to the machinery directive and the AI Act, you think, okay, what do they want from me? And I think that leads to unclarity, and unclarity is never a good basic to comply to rules. And on the other hand, I think when it comes to the authorities and to the surveillance and the governance of the rules, this is always also a big part, because of it's very important who will be enforcing the rules of these specific sectoral regulations and the AI Act. Right now, it is not clear, and it is proposed that this will be the sectoral authorities. For example, here in Berlin, this would be the Gewerbeaufsichtsamt. I don't know the German English word for that, but now they have to enforce the rules of trade, and in addition the rules of AI, and this will lead to the problem, and I think to the problem of AI experts that will be needed there. Right now they do a good job, but if they are added the job to enforce and monitor the laws of AI Act, this will be, I think, really challenging, because the task is quite big, and the persons who will do it stay the same most of the time. So I think this will be a challenge.
Is that also a challenge in the public sector, GovTech? I mean, this competence seems to be very critical, no?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try answer your previous question, but again in a more maybe normative and less regulatorily precise and more vibes-based way. So the issue with AI, roughly speaking, is that it is a stochastic system and not fully deterministic, and therefore has all of these problems like explainability and so on and so forth, and bias. And the only way that we have institutionally really figured out how to integrate this into our structures is that we have a level of human oversight that makes it just that the human takes full accountability. And I say we have figured this out, not because this is some kind of ideal, but because this is how it works, right? Everywhere where everyone's now using a chatbot to do some part of their job, de facto, we've not changed any regulatory structures around that by and large, right? We've just, that person assumes all of the same kinds of responsibility and accountability that they did before, as does the organization that they're in. So it's clearly a model that works, and that works towards, in a way that can be economically viable as well. I guess my takeaway is that we should probably just stick with it in domains where AI is doing things that are already regulated. So this is also, I think, the ultimate consequence of the thing I said at the start. If it's not possible to set technical standards for AI, but AI is being used to support an already regulated activity, then I think we should be relying on the regulation in that sector entirely. The type of thing this does not apply to is qualitatively new AI capabilities, and I want to be clear, there are already some and potentially many. This starts with all these sorts of multi-agent risks, asymmetric risks, for example, bioterrorism or cyber warfare, and a whole host of other capabilities that AI might already have now and very plausibly will have in the future. I don't think that existing sectoral regulation covers it there, but in one sentence, if it's already being regulated now and you can use AI to do it faster, the regulatories have to stay structures have to stay the same. And I'm really sorry, I have one more thing that I forgot to say, which is everybody then goes, oh, but what about the liability attribution and so on and so forth? And I think generally, we do forget how good markets are at solving this kind of thing. For example, we found some kind of structure in which an old person who can't see anymore correctly can get in a car, and an insurer is ready to underwrite their driving and insure them, basically. And I think we underestimate how much insurers are willing to try pricing AI risks and how much that will solve in liability attribution without formally requiring any new regulation for anything that's already regulated. Sorry about the long answer.
Perfect. So first things first, we need to understand the EU AI Act. We need to understand the compliance requirements that affect me as a company, as an SME, as a small mid-cap, or as an organization, as a public body. And then we need to also make sure that these new capabilities that you mentioned, and we're getting to you here again, Philip, of course play out at an international, at a global level, and I feel are galloping away from our kind of catch-up game of translating regulation into practice. So, and how far you, as a co-author of the International AI Safety Report, could you talk a little bit about what the emerging risks are, and also very exciting what you mentioned with the multi-agent risks?
Yeah, so I mean, what we see right now is, so capabilities are advancing exponentially. So we see that the complexity of tasks that AI systems can perform is growing at an exponential rate, and all the recent releases were exactly on this exponential trend. And the risks are also increasing. So we've had several companies now go to the high risk threshold for biorisk, for example, so AI systems helping people in developing biological weapons. We've had Anthropic uncover an attempt by a state-backed hacking group to conduct cyber attacks, and they automated 80 to 90% of this attack chain through AI. And we also see in several laboratory studies that AI systems are showing signs of deceiving their users, lying to them, and in some extreme cases trying to prevent their own shutdown. I think we all agree that this is very concerning, and here this is kind of the opposite problem. So it's not like we have difficult interfaces here with existing sectoral legislation, it's that we have nothing at all to work with. And And so I see at least 3 big unsolved problems right now that we need to think about. The first I mentioned is multi-agent risk and these kind of interactive risks. The other is the problem of evaluation awareness. So what we see in studies is that when you safety test an AI model, the model will sometimes know about this. Just based on the kinds of questions that you ask, the model is able to infer this. Just like with human subjects in psychological experiments. Like it is very hard to test a human being without them knowing that right now you're testing them. And of course that changes their behavior. So when you safety test an AI model, how do you know that the behavior it shows is actually in good faith and not just something that the model does to make you believe certain things about the model? So that's also an unsolved problem, how evaluators can deal with this. And then the third problem is online learning. So what the companies are betting really big on right now is this idea that you have an AI system that learns on the fly and continuously updates in response to new information, also data about the physical world and so on. And this will make the AI agents even more capable and reliable, at least that's the hope. And what this does from a regulatory perspective is it completely blurs the line between model releases. It's not like you put out a model and then it's there and you don't change it anymore. Quite the opposite, the number of models goes to infinity, as it were, because they update themselves continuously. And I think that goes back to the point I mentioned in the beginning about organizational transparency, because partly for this problem about online learning, I think that just testing and regulating the models themselves will only go so far, and we really have to look at the organization at some point.
So just as we become, as we get a firm grasp on how to secure AI systems in the classical way, LLMs, if you put those onto robots, and if you then take LBMs, large behavioral models, and the robots can not only talk to you, but also do things, and these risks are just galloping away from us, we really need to play regulatory catch-up once again. And so my question is a bit like, I think you mentioned this word future-proofing regulation. Or was it you, Chris? What does that actually mean? Like, how can we do this?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess, again, my novice's lens on the AI Act is that it has been more than once surprised to find that it had actually made assumptions about the nature of AI systems that were broken by new versions of AI. The most obvious one by far being the assumption about purpose-boundness, or at least the ability to define a specific purpose for a system, that general purpose systems that completely upended, and now we have, you know, the mansion of the AI Act with the shed next to it of GPAI regulation as it was proposed, as it was described when it was proposed. I think it's certainly possible that this happens again, and I think there's lots of developments already in the way AI is being developed now that even suggest this. So the biggest one, I think, is also continual learning, multi-agent systems, and the third one is embodiment, basically. And so the question that I think we have to ask is, what can we do, what can we write in policy that is resistant to this? Another way to phrase that question is, what are the commonalities of all of these systems, basically? And the only commonalities that I would argue we would end up finding is we can see what goes in terms that we can understand, and we can see what comes back out, the actions they have, they take, the outputs these systems have. And we can build transparency requirements, and we can build performance requirements, and we can build all sorts of specifications based on this, basically. I think, yeah, in one sentence, the only way to future-proof is to write policy only for commonalities.
Great. Please do raise your hand if you have one or two questions to our fantastic panelists, so you can think about it. Meanwhile, I wanted to ask you, Johannes, robot law. I find that such a fascinating term. Is that like a nascent field, or is that really something that can build on decades of experience? Could you comment on that?
I think robot law, as you mentioned, it's more like it's developed in a few years, over the years. It's not only, there's not one textbook, not one law book that means robot law, but it has many fields. For example, the AI Act, for example, the Product Reliability Directive, for example, the criminal law, even the criminal law, and GDPR. There are so many fields of law that you have to obey to. So robot law is like, you have to obey to many fields, and I think that's the thing that makes it interesting. Yeah? You cannot think, okay, criminal law, I just focus on that. No, you have to do the other fields too, and I think, that makes it quite interesting.
Perfect. Do we have any questions from the audience? Daniel from TÜV AI Lab.
Thank you for the great discussion. I have a question about the requirements, the transparency needs when it comes to integrating general purpose AI models within high-risk AI systems. So there we have on the general purpose AI models with systemic risk level, the code of practice and the risk management requirements there, which are about systemic risks. But then we have kind of different risk management requirements for the high-risk AI system providers. And my question is, do you think that there is enough transparency that is required by the code of practice in order for the high-risk AI system providers to perform good risk management, and also for the assessors of the high-risk AI systems? So just one example, is there enough transparency about serious incidents that occur from the GPAI models so that the high-risk AI system providers, for example, agent providers, can perform good risk management practices, can identify all relevant risks?
So far. For the AI Act, so I think there is, when it comes to serious, for example, serious incidents, the reporting of that, I think there are structures already given and they will be used. I think this should work. We have to implement it, we have to transform it into national law, but I think if we do that right, this will fit in. I think there are still some problems when it comes to transparency on generative AI, especially when it comes to generated media, on videos, pictures, and so on. I think there is still a lack of transparency, but overall, I think in the AI Act there is enough. And now is the question, how do we implement it, how do we transform it into national law, and we will see that.
Any other questions? Silko Strauer from DFKI.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe just a short question. Philip Fox, you talked about AI systems that somehow get aware that they are tested and then respond differently. So my question would be, what do you have in mind there? Do you is it more like the diesel scandal, where you have companies that that kind of engineer this into AI systems, or are you thinking of an AI system which somehow does a reasoning on that and comes up with a different strategy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was mainly thinking about the model itself, showing this kind of deceptive behavior out of its own steam, as it were. Partly because, I mean, the companies themselves don't really understand the models, so it's not straightforward, even if they wanted to kind of insert hidden objectives or something, or kind of manipulate the model in a way, like how exactly would they do it? And what I had in mind was mainly the problem of sandbagging. So when you do capability evaluations on models, you want to know, like, how good is this model at coding or at self-replicating, getting itself out of an air-gapped container or something like that. Now you test the model and it turns out the model can't do it. That still leaves open like two hypotheses. First simple one is, well, the model just can't do it, and that's why I tested like this. And the other is, well, the model can actually do it, but because it knows it's currently being evaluated for that very capability, it's suppressing that capability and just I mean, I'm a philosopher by training, so that's just Wittgenstein's rule-following problem. So it just, I mean, this goes very far now, but you observe a behavior and you don't know like what's the underlying reality, what's generating the behavior. And it's just, for principled reasons, very difficult to solve this because it's a theoretical problem and the companies are working on this and they're trying interpretability techniques where you like look into the model internals and try to see like what's actually going on. But as we heard from Chris, I personally wouldn't rely on this working out within the next 5 or 10 years.
Talking about the next 5 or 10 years, our time is already up. So I really feel like we would have the chance to continue this for even half an hour, an hour more, but we can't. But what's been really successful, I think, in this panel is to delve into one aspect of trustworthiness, transparency, because of course there are many more, be it robustness, accuracy, or someone called it more dependability today, which was super interesting. And also we have here with us the author of the Certification Readiness Matrix, right? Where from the state of AI auditing, we have asked ourselves, you really have to dig down into the different life cycles of AI systems and through all these transparency trustworthiness dimensions. So I think this worked out really well, that we feel like we are not working alone on these individual aspects and we really need to dedicate sufficient time for understanding and applying these trustworthiness dimensions. And there are super smart experts out there who are also thinking about this from different angles. So thank you so much for your time and for your expertise today on this panel. 2 things that I was missing a little bit and I was hoping to get into deeper would be in how far we are transparent enough with the AI Act regulatory regime regarding the sustainability of AI models. I think the energy demand, this is also a huge topic. And the other thing I was really hoping to talk about, but we're running out of time, is adversarial poetry and how far maybe not only the AI agents have to get smarter in fooling us, but we have to get more out of them by becoming poets. I don't know if anyone heard about this. Apparently it's very successful. I'm not an expert. But thank you so much for the time. And do talk to these people in the next break. But now we have our next session. Thank you.
Thank you.